This is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sharon Hicks from Open Minds, and I want to welcome you to today's presentation, Using Crowdsourcing to Develop New Service Line Innovations, Leveraging the Value of Collaborative Innovation. Boy, that's a mouthful. Our presentation today was brought to you by the ECHO Group and Open Minds. I'll be the moderator today. We'll be going around 90 minutes. We want to discuss the crowdsourcing concepts, the benefits of using crowdsourcing in behavioral health, and also give you an opportunity to hear firsthand examples of crowdsourcing in behavioral health from our four presenters today. Our presenters are Brandon Costello, an electronic health record analyst at Adelphoi Village, Steve LaFleur, who's a HIT, Health Information Technology Consultant, Carolyn Spence, who's the Chief Information Officer at Alexander Youth Network, and Chris Thompson, the Senior Vice President of Operations at Monarch. A few housekeeping rules before we start. We've muted all of the attendees so that we don't have any feedback or noise on the event. We are recording today's event. We want to make sure we have a high quality sound. We will hold a question and answer discussion session at the end of the presentation. So at any time throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit questions via the question box on the GoToWebinar panel. If your question is for a specific person, just put for so-and-so in the comments, and I will make sure to direct the questions appropriately. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Today, again, we're using crowdsourcing to develop new service line innovation. Our goal today is to explain the crowdsourcing concept and then to talk about using crowdsourcing in clinical workflows and program development. A little bit of an overview on crowdsourcing. Like many words that have popped up into our common vernacular, crowdsourcing is often used maybe a little more broadly than it should be. So for today, the definition of crowdsourcing is a method of solving problems through the contributions of mutual people. It can be virtual or in person, can be open or by invitation only. And crowdsourcing seems to work because it's been demonstrated that diverse inputs drive superior solutions. And this concept of cognitive diversity is really important in terms of thinking about how to address big gaps in knowledge. So to use a very concrete example, if you're trying to figure out what is the best way for boys from ages of 10 to 12 to spend 2 hours after school, and you're only using a discussion that is populated by young single people who don't have children, you're going to get very different answers than if you include that group or if you include parents of that group. And so the broader your cognitive diversity is, the more interesting information you're going to get. But that requires one to make sure that the peer group or the crowdsourcing group is diverse. Crowdsourcing is designed to create design and use patterns that allow the entity that's trying to solve the problem to break down its parts into meaningful units. So looking at a specific workflow issue, you can say, okay, people come into the clinic and we register them and then they go into their therapy appointment. Or you can say people come into the clinic, they walk to the front desk looks up when he or she is available, asks them why they're here. So, breaking work down into units that then one can intervene on. And then take the findings and edit them into a cohesive whole. so that you can have a holistic view of the way that your re-engineered process is going to work. There are a few examples of crowdsourcing. There are many examples of crowdsourcing. There are a few that I think are really innovative. Waze is an app that allows users to report traffic jams and automatically give directions for best routes. Lots of people are looking at it. It's crowdsourced because it's using inputs from everybody in the network. So, you know, it's not limited in terms of scope and geography, only in terms of who's a member. Samsung has a dedicated crowdsourcing facility in Palo Alto, and they've used their facilities to think about what's the next big electronic product that Samsung should be offering. And they are crowdsourcing by offering the innovators some share in revenue for the new product. Apple asked U.S. students to use their creativity to build and submit apps, and then they took the best of those and they sold them via the App Store and gave the monies back to the kids and the schools. Google in 2014 did a Doodle for Google contest that was limited to middle schoolers, and the winner won $30,000 college scholarship and a $50,000 Google Education Technology grant for their schools. Other kinds of things that are looking at this very broad view of participation and involvement are things like Kickstarter and GoFundMe, Donors Who Choose, Uber, Airbnb, etc. And again, getting a lot of press, getting a lot of discussion. And so we want to think about how to, I'm sorry, I'm going to break out for a second. Brittany, I just got a comment from someone that their sound isn't working. Do we have a way for them to troubleshoot that?
The best thing is going to be to either hang up the phone if you are on the phone and dial back in, or if you're using your mic and speakers on your computer, try dialing in on a phone.
Okay. Could one of you go into the question box and answer this specific person's question for him? Thanks. Sorry, everybody. Using crowds to solve big problems. There we go. Math and science and physics, there's many examples of using crowds to solve technical problems. You're sending out a big mathematical equation to groups of high-level mathematicians and having them all work on different parts of the application. There was a great process that one of the big universities used, where they sent out the taxonomy that had been used in this scientific field to everybody that they could think of in the world, and they used the crowd to actually come up with a way to categorize the different taxonomy groupings, and it changed the way that scientific industry worked. So there's lots of examples in these kinds of hard sciences, but we have, I think, tremendous opportunities to think about in behavioral health how we can use our collective knowledge to improve the bottom line productivity or profitability of in various clinical programs, how to improve care to our consumers, how to measure outcomes and quality, how to think about outcomes and quality, how to create kind of national standards for certain things that we don't really have national standards for now. In behavioral health, we have lots of national meetings in which we come together to talk about new things. So we have the forum. We need to figure out then, how do we use this forum to take advantage of the power of crowds? Whoops. I did something. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, sorry. I am going to now throw it over to Steve LaFleur, who's going to talk a little bit about this potential, this opportunity for using crowds at a specific event of the Peer-to-Peer Summit. So, Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, my name's Steve LaFleur. I've been in the mental health field for about 25 years now. I started as a clinician at a community mental health center and was intimately involved as a clinician and then a supervisor of clinicians in choosing an electronic medical record. And the thing that we realized real early on in that process is that we were establishing with that vendor that we chose a long-term relationship, or what we anticipated as a long-term relationship. And so I saw it as very important real early on to make sure that our agency and the group that was working with the record got to know as much as we could about the company that designed it and was helping us try to develop it. So almost 20 years ago now, I started to actually go to the vendor's site and visit and talk with staff and get to know them. And probably did that 3 or 4 years. We did training there on their site instead of having them come to us, because we wanted to get to know their staff and what was going on. And I think this whole idea of peer-to-peer that started, I believe it was 2003. I think they started that so that I'd stop coming to their office. But started to have a conference where customers could come and talk with each other, visit with each other, struggle with each other, and also a place where we could get to know the vendor's staff, and they would provide insight and they would provide sessions, and eventually after a couple of years they provided essentially what would be called office hours, where we could work with them on issues. I think the exciting thing about the concept of peer-to-peer was the reality that I didn't have any problem seeing my mental health colleagues in the field as peers, because we were all doing the same thing, but growing to realize over the years that our EHR vendor and their staff, they're just working in a different part of the business, and they really ended up being peers as well. Peers that we could talk to about the issues that we were coming across. So that's what I've appreciated about peer-to-peer, and I'll throw it over to Brandon.
I'm Brandon Costello. I've been working in this field for 17 years, 15 and a half of which I was a clinician. And for about the last year and a half, I've been working directly with our EHR department as an analyst when we chose as an agency to completely re-implement our EHR. And in doing so, we returned to peer-to-peer. As an agency, our attendance was spotty through the years. There would be years of attendance and then some years where we didn't attend. But in 2013, when the decision of our agency was full re-implementation of our EHR, Adelphoi went back to peer-to-peer and really started there and talking with other colleagues from the finance realm to the clinical realm to discover how to do our re-implementation right. You know, when you're coming around to doing it a second time, you want to make sure that you're knocking it out of the park and you're getting it right this time. And so since 2013, we have had representatives. Last year we had 6 people from clinical and finance and the EHR department all attend peer-to-peer. And we've walked away with a lot learned, a lot of great connections built. I think one of the great benefits for me the first time I attended in 2014 was a presentation that was done by Carolyn Spence, who will be speaking soon. She did a presentation, and I walked out of that room, and the words I used was, I was completely geeked out by what she had done. And she was a great example for how I wanted and envisioned our EHR to work for us back at Adelphoi. And so that example has stuck in my mind from that first time at PeertoPeer in 2014. And then I came back in 2015 and was a presenter. My coworker and I, Samantha, we both did a presentation on re-implementing and refreshing your electronic health record. And one of the things I got out of being a presenter at PeertoPeer was how many more people came up to me and talked to me as a result of presenting, because they wanted to seek out my knowledge and how we redesigned clinical workflow and how we designed our training and were able to re-implement our electronic health record. So it's been a wonderful experience, and as a result of relationships built, I can now call or email any of these guys that I've met at PeertoPeer and say, hey, Caroline, here's my question on this, and I know who I'm getting that answer from and the quality of work that they have and the knowledge behind it. And so I feel like when I'm asking questions to peers that I've met personally, I know what their word is worth. So now I'll kick it over to Caroline and let her take a swing at things.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I've been working in this industry for probably about 19 years, specifically with the company I'm with, and we implemented our EHR back in 2004 and have been participating in the peer-to-peer summit pretty much since the very first summit that occurred. So we've been there for, been in attendance for 14 years. I joked the other day that I missed a couple of years, had to take some time off to have children, but that's how it goes. And but it's been a great experience for Alexander Youth Network as far as just seeing so many different ways of doing things, and so kind of being able to come out of our little silo and look at how other people are doing stuff. The great thing about peer-to-peer is that a lot of customers of the product are actually presenting and how they're using it and how it's improved their process flows, how it's improved, how they deliver their services. I get a lot of information when I'm at the peer-to-peer from, a diverse population of people, whether it's finance people, clinical folks, some of the more senior folks at different organizations, and how they're trying to push things through their industry, how they're using the data that they're pulling from their EHRs to not only help their business, but how they're, using all that information to work with state representatives. And so it's provided a really cool opportunity to sit down and talk to different people and just take little tidbits of what they're doing. And kind of how Brandon indicated earlier, we implemented a project and had a vision of how we wanted that to go, and that project was based off of lunch conversations at peer-to-peer, phone conversations. We do, webinars with different customers and stuff like that, where everybody just kind of gets on and sees how, I guess, new enhancements to the application, and then you start seeing the questions that are coming from different people, and sometimes the questions bring up really cool ideas of how to change things. So it's been a great experience, and it's really helped us our EHR in a really cool direction, where we're automating a lot of really neat things and changing our clinicians' experiences through increased efficiencies and, you know, return on the information that they're getting back from us and stuff. So with what I'm going to do now is push you over to Chris Thompson, who is also one of our really close partners here in North Carolina, and let him explain a little bit about himself.
Thanks, Carolyn. Obviously, I must be the newbie because between Brandon, Steve, and Carolyn, I only have 5 years in this industry itself. You know, not unfamiliar with nonprofit, but when it comes to the behavioral health industry, definitely a newbie. So, you know, as Monarch, we're a large provider in the North Carolina area, and one of the cool things about peer-to-peer is it's an opportunity to definitely network with different groups just outside of your state, outside of your area, where you can garner information that you can take back and be able to either implement it in our EHR or in our operations or the flow. You know, my first peer-to-peer was in 2014, and I expected completely I'd go up there and I would be inundated with IT information. And one of the cool things, like Brandon had spoke about, I was sitting in Carolyn's presentation, and it was like an aha moment about, from an operations standpoint, and seeing it on the screen on, wow, we can have our EHR do this, or we can have it do that, and the thoughts just came about. And you know, I know enough about information technology to be on the dangerous side. In fact, the IT department tries to keep me away from any IT-related issue, just because I am just close enough to be dangerous. But the cool thing was, again, was the knowledge base and being able to sit and have those conversations with people that are in the field and exchange ideas and be able to improve operations. So one of the things for us was open access. You know, we've been providing open access for a couple of years, and you know, we're seeing about 150 individuals per day who actually walk into our offices. And so for us, on an EHR perspective, it was a challenge to make it work with that many volume and still create the efficiencies and still be able to get the billing out and to keep our denial rates, you know, at 5% or less, and being able to work through it. So one of the cool things at peer-to-peer for us is picking the brains of Steve and Brandon and Carolyn about issues that we run into, and then helping us to figure it out on the back end so that we can put solutions in place. And again, those conversations may or may not happen in a presentation. It's out in the middle of a hallway at a hotel after the conference, where you're just, as I think Brandon or Steve talked about geeking out. You know, it's you know, seeing the excitement level as you're working through with other agencies who are struggling with an issue, and yet you have a solution, and then you talk it through, and they get so excited about being able to take back what the information they garner from peer-to-peer, and then being able to take it back and implementing that in the organization it's really cool. But it's also something that not only for DHR, but anything that's going on within the agency, pulling from crowds, you know, this whole crowdsourcing idea, pulling from people who have the experience, and again, being able to network and talk about it so that we can make a difference in our industry is just a really cool concept. And being willing to, you know, be outspoken, be willing to throw yourself out there in an environment where you may or may not be comfortable, but realizing that's where solutions come from. So I had a great opportunity to be able to present at the last peer-to-peer on open access, and one of the cool things was the individuals who came up afterwards and were asking about processes from operations, not just the electronic health record, but how we were able to get it started and how we were able to implement it in our challenges. And those are experiences, being able to share those ideas on lessons learned that I think that definitely being able to pull from this crowdsourcing idea is something that's really, really key. You know, Carolyn, I don't know, or Steve, I know we were having the conversation last week as we were prepping for this phone call, And one of the things that all of a sudden Carolyn and Steve were talking about, the 270, 271 integration inside of our electronic health record. And at Monarch, that was something that we've been working on and trying to work through. And Steve and Carolyn were like, hey, Carolyn's like, hey, we just did it. You know, we just implemented it. Steve's like, hey, I've been working on this. And so, you know, one of the cool things was within a couple of days, Carolyn was sharing, you know, helping give some information for me that I can take back to my agency so that we can hopefully implement the 270 and 271 effectively. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all.
So before you talk about it, this is Sharon. We have a bunch of questions coming in, and one of the questions that I'd like to ask you guys to talk about, and maybe you can each answer it. What's the difference between crowdsourcing and a traditional user group? You know, hearing a presentation and then deciding to take it back to your organization is what one would expect at a user group or a conference. If we think about crowdsourcing, I don't know how many of you on the phone have read this, but in 2004, a guy named James Starowicki wrote a book called The Wisdom of Crowds, Why the Many Are Smarter Than the Few. And his basic premise is that the aggregation of information in groups results in decisions that are better than could have been made by a single member of the group. So, you know, kind of in essence, the group is more than the sum of its parts. So it's that process of not just linearly learning, but crowdsourcing the solutions that I think the participants are interested in. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about how peer-to-peer is more of a crowdsource than a traditional user group, and or are the groups that come out of that you know, crowdsourcing versus traditional user group?
I think how peer-to-peer is unique in crowdsourcing versus a user group, which I think can be kind of, I want to say, generic in terms of topic, in that, you know, you can be a part of a user group that's, you know, cell phone technology, but it's not specific to exactly what it is that you're using or looking at. So when you look at peer-to-peer and the crowdsourcing done there, it was directly in relation to the same EHR product that we were all using and how we needed to make it work for us. And at Adelphoi, where we were looking at possibly switching EHRs and we were shopping around other products, in 2013 and in attending peer-to-peer, a lot of our members of our agency that were able to attend were able to learn what did we do wrong the first time, and what's broken in our system internally at Adelphoi that needs to be fixed. And in 2014, when we were talking with a representative from our EHR agency, I asked them to be very blunt and tell us where our problems were. And it came down to, we had a lot of really bad, dirty processes. And it was kind of from that moment where we took the stance of no dirty process will go into the EHR moving forward. So in re-implementing, we took the stance, only good information in so that we can get good information out. And it's going to go in through a clean process. And those processes, like clinical workflows, are so important to be done accurately and timely and right. And so to be able to crowdsource very specifically, how are you entering your clinical information timely, accurately the first time, and getting a bill out the door accurately the first time? All those questions that are very specific to mental health organizations, and you're getting those very direct answers from people who know that system best.
I think another difference is I'm actually involved with a user group that kind of developed out of a peer-to-peer conference. We've probably got about 15 agencies that use the same EHR vendor, and we have a user group that we call each other. We have a phone call monthly, and we identify issues. We identify things that we want improved in the record. The piece that's really missing in the user group is we don't really get into breaking things out into their individual pieces and trying to put them back together again. It's more of a global look, but definitely at some of those user group conference calls, issues are identified that I can relate with the agencies that I've been working with, and they're issues that I put on a list that when I get to peer-to-peer, I know who I want to talk to break down some of the pieces to try and solve it, and then share with the group. So I think that difference of a user group, a lot of times you're more global, and even if peer-to-peer was identified as a user group, it's not so much where you go and you hear presentations by the EHR vendor staff, although we hear those, but you hear from other customers, and you have the opportunity to break down some of the pieces with the vendor staff, and that kind of goes back to the thing that I appreciate about peer-to-peer is it's not just my colleagues in mental health, but it's the actual EHR vendor staff all the way down to programmers that are there that can show me the little pieces and help me figure out what's a better way to make this thing run.
I think also...
Carolyn, yeah, go ahead, Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, I think also in attending peer-to-peer, like Chris was just saying, not only do you kind of have a list of what people you want to talk to when you get there, but once you're attending and you learn who these people are, you learn what presentations you want to sit in on. Like, I know if Caroline's presenting, or Chris or Steve is presenting, or a very specific developer from our EHR vendor, I want to be in that room because I know I'm going to walk away with good pieces of information, things I may not have even thought of before. So you seek out not only people, but presenters.
So this is Sharon, and I want to just, I want to push you all a little bit. Where's the innovation component of the crowdsourcing? You're giving examples of learning from each other, which I think is great. But we do have some questions coming in about, you know, how has the knowledge of the crowd been used to improve the entire industry or the entire way that we review a problem? And you know, besides the specific peer-to-peer summit and learning from your technology company, how has the relationships that have been built outside of the technology that you use, how have those relationships helped to you know, develop new service lines or think about what is needed to get behavioral health as a whole out of a, you know, out of a specific issue that we're all struggling with. Can you guys speak about that?
I think I'll talk to that a little bit, Sharon. So, you know, one of the things which I think every behavioral health organization deals with is the frustration over the documentation and how much time clinicians have to spend documenting versus seeing clients. And so one of the things that came out of the peer-to-peer summit, you know, over the years that we've attended and stuff is just, you know, and it didn't all happen in one peer-to-peer. It probably happened in a course of 4 or 5 different peer-to-peers. But over the course of the time that, I've attended, we sat down, whether it be at lunches or whether it be during cocktail hour, and a lot of conversations occur, and a lot of people are getting excited about different things, but also the opportunity to gripe and groan about the things that are frustrating, hearing about how other people have kind of gotten around it a little bit, and then all of a sudden you'll start seeing a brainstorm session start at a table somewhere where all of a sudden somebody's throwing something out. And so from my specific example, just to kind of go through, we were having, significant issues with the documentation. If I use the clinical assessment when a client first comes into services, as an example, a clinician would spend about 4 hours doing an assessment, 2 face-to-face, and then an additional 2, sometimes 3 hours, just typing up that long document that completely tells everybody what's going on. So as you can imagine, we're not actually seeing clients during that additional 3 hours. So through the course of the many different sessions that I went to, or the many different people that we sat down and talked with, or the brainstorming sessions, where we sat down at tables and talked, all of a sudden a light bulb went off, and it was like, hey, can't we just change how we document things? There's no, we don't have to spend hours typing up the same sentence on every single assessment that we do. We could figure out how to build something into the application that comes, like a checkbox. And so as the clinician is moving through the assessment, there's a lot more checkboxes, a lot more pull downs for validated fields, which gives us the opportunity to take all of those different pieces of information that we're gathering on the clients that we're seeing, make it more fluid so the clinicians can enter it quicker. And then on the back end, when you have to produce the document, you use what our clinicians call magic. So you use a reporting tool that will then take that checkbox, turn it into an assessment. So our assessment right now is like 9 or 10 pages of checkboxes. Now, mind you, there is some narrative that they have to type in, but for the most part, there's a lot of checkboxes and pull downs. But when they print out the document to send it to outside sources to see an assessment, they've got a 9-page fully typed document that comes out in paragraph format. And they didn't have to spend days doing that. We were able to take their documentation time down to spending 2 hours with the client and maybe an additional 30 minutes to fine-tune things that they're putting into the client's assessment. So those are things that we got from peer-to-peer. Those are things that I got from sitting at a table with folks. I know Steve, I watched presentations that he did way back when we first started going to peer-to-peer back in 2004 through 6 or whatnot, and kept thinking, oh, that's so cool. I wish we could get there someday. And then, spending all that time and investment going to peer-to-peer and seeing what everybody's doing, and then taking bits and pieces and sitting down at the table. And I really feel like we are at Alexander's and some of the organizations like Brandon and Chris's, that we're working together to figure out how can we change the face of behavioral health, which is so narrative driven, and change it so that we're actually gathering information and then using that information in very constructive and valuable ways to give us feedback on outcomes that we're doing, things that we're doing with the client, things that we're doing with the population that you can't get out of narrative format. And we're also decreasing the time that they're spending in front of a computer and allowing them to spend more time face-to-face with the clients. And I think that is one of the really cool things that has come out of this process.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. I'm wondering if any of you have used crowdsourcing to think about other kinds of clinical innovations. I love the clinical innovation in documentation that transcends one specific organization just looking at their own process. How have you guys adopted the use of crowdsourcing for things like developing new lines of services, or thinking about new business opportunities? Can you all talk about that a little bit?
Chris and I were just doing that right before this session started. Monarch is, they do a lot of telepsych, and that's something that we're starting to get into. So between the two of us, we've been back and forth trying to figure out, what's the best way to do it, what's the best way to make sure that we're meeting everybody's needs and stuff. And so really just, pulling off of him and then I think Steve has piped in a couple times and said, you know, that's a really cool idea. So I'll let Chris talk a little bit more about that.
I mean, we were just having discussion, you know, about how we're billing for telemed services, how we're able to even do it in our electronic health record, but also some of the other nuances on not just, you know, not just how we bill it, but also how we actually integrate that into our clinics itself, whether it's making sure that we have dedicated T1 lines or internet access so that you don't drop signals and such, and being able to share how we're able to coordinate activities, and then also how we're able to get buy-in from our doctors and our nurse practitioners, or even our, in the state of North Carolina, our LCSWs can also telemed, and how they're able to do that, and not just from a coordination from, again, from the electronic health record, but also from a flow perspective of what it looks like from the time that they come in to the individual comes in to the time that they leave. And so it's again, as you're talking service lines and adding, you know, capacity, you know, as things start to transcend to more and more people using their home computers or their smartphones or different aspects for video conferencing to get the care that they need when they need it at the place that they need it. You know, telemedicine is definitely, or telepsychiatry is definitely going to become more and more prominent. So sharing that information so us to providers, and exactly how from a financial standpoint that, you know, Carolyn's Allergy Use Network can make sure that they're getting everything that they can to be able to bill it out properly, is just one aspect of crowdsourcing, where we were having discussion about how we do it versus how they were looking at doing it and how we've been able to get reimbursed for it. One of the other issues, Sharon, I was at, you know, National Council Conference this year, and when we talk about service lines, you know, we were struggling with a particular service line in our area for supported employment, and I sat in a table with individuals from all across the United States, raised my hand and said, hey, does anybody else in this area provide supported employment, and how are you able to make it work, not only from a financial perspective but from a operations perspective? And the cool thing about that crowdsourcing idea is 3 different organizations all packed up and go, yeah, we're doing it, and we're doing it this way. And it created conversation so that I was able to go back and tweak some of our processes and some of the things that we're doing, even going back to the state of North Carolina about some things that need to change for us to make it successful. So that was just one example of how crowdsourcing was effective from a service line perspective.
Yeah, and that's a great example because, you know, the concept of crowdsourcing is industry experts, industry leaders getting together, sharing information, and then using those to change policy or to change standards or to create cross standards within an industry. So I was wondering if maybe you all could talk about the use of crowdsourcing for things like implementation of ICD-10, the move to the CCBHCs that's happening, you know, PHBH integration in Medicaid, and any of those kinds of big ticket items, if there's any way that you all have thought about using crowdsourcing.
Well, Carolyn, why don't you talk about the ICD-10 conversion? That's a great one.
North Carolina actually North Carolina actually adopted the DSM-5 earlier than, so about a year and a half earlier than the required federal rules of, you know, putting it in place by October of 2015. So we, in North Carolina, one of the things that we actually did is we spent a lot of time, you know, obviously reading through that manual, working together as providers in North Carolina and trying to figure out what was the best way to, you know, to implement that. Of course, there's a lot of things that we had to consider with the crosswalking from the DSM-4 to the DSM-5, then of course the ICD-9 to the ICD-10. Lots of drill down on all of those different pieces and components had to occur. And so, but we actually ended up like I said, working with the North Carolina providers. We work with Monarch. We went into our EHR system, found the issues that presented with the EHR with the early adoption of the DSM-5, reported those back to the vendor, but then we were able to figure out how to adapt the application ourselves to make it work, since the vendor turnaround time for changing the application was not going to meet the North Carolina requirements, and since it was a one-off state requirement, we just decided to move forward on getting everything in place ourselves. So a few of us just sat down and, you know, kind of went through all of that. We had the forethought to plan it out so that when we were transitioning to the DSM-5, we also loaded the crosswalked ICD-9s to the DSM-5 diagnosis along with the ICD-10. So we loaded those right into our system. We started that whole process in probably about June of 2015, and then I believe all of us implemented in June of 2014. We implemented the DSM-5 by September of 2015. So we implemented 1 month before the required time frame that the state put out, which was October of 2014. And I would have to say that the biggest challenge was not so much the development, but more or less getting the clinicians involved in the process, getting all of the diagnoses updated, you know, setting up, you know, procedures and processes in place to make that happen, sharing that amongst the team, identifying the, you know, the sore spots or the issues that weren't necessarily getting resolved as quickly as we would like them to be resolved. But when the ICD-10 came in October of 2015, I think I'm correct on that time frame, but anyway, when it came in October of 2015, neither one, and I'm going to speak for Monarch and Alexander, but we never had a denied claim for ICD-10 related issues. So our billings and everything went through, no denials due to ICD-10 conversion at all, which was very impressive. I have to say, on our, you know, that everything seemed to work with that whole transition. But it was a big project. It involved a lot of people from the vendor side, from the state representatives to you know, individual organizations in North Carolina giving their feedback. We had to spend a lot of time with our managed care organizations in the state, talking through their system issues that, you know, they thought they had some things set up correctly, but because we had spent so much time researching this and trying to make it just right in our EHR system, we were able to feed back to the managed care organizations in North Carolina and let them know that they had some bugs in their system, which helped them to improve their system and get it all right for the rest of the providers in time for the full implementation. So it was really a really cool project to work on.
I think one thing that speaks to me the value of crowdsourcing and the reason that that it's such a valuable resource. With the same project of the ICD-10 conversion, I was involved with 3 different companies in 3 different states that all had the same issue, having to have that in place in the software by October 1st. And each one of the companies in those different states hit that target, but they all approached the challenge from a different perspective to get to the same end result. And they were able to do that, you know, from their perspective, from what their state required, what lists they needed, what resources they needed to do it, what the time frame was, and each one of those states was different. And so the value of being in the same software and being able to share some key concepts about how to go at this and how to make it work was invaluable. So the idea that it takes more than just our own little world to solve something, we may get there, but we may get there a little bit faster and with a little more efficiency if we've got that pooled knowledge that we're able to access.
Yeah, and I think that's this is Sharon again. I think that's a great that's a great example. One of the things that come up when people think about crowdsourcing in business and in behavioral health, and even if you look at the way that some of the for-profit entities like Samsung are using crowdsourcing, is The question related to how do you separate proprietary information from industry information? So if you were thinking about, developing a new service line and you were sitting in a group where you were crowdsourcing best practice, and there were other people in the group from your service area, how do you all think about that issue between the kind of crowdsourcing versus proprietary information? Have you all thought about that at all?
I think a lot of us kind of see it as an I get the idea of the proprietary information and stuff that you implement, but for the most part, our experiences have been pretty open and transparent, where we're always trying to share information with each other and, feed off of the successes and the failures. And that's been, that kind of has been more important than trying to keep everything, in its own silo and not sharing it with other folks. I mean, the information that we get from Monarch or that we get from, the different organizations has been very helpful in helping us to get, the services we provide pushed forward and moving, because at the same time, we can't all, we have to kind of share what I'm trying to say is there's too many customers for only one agency to serve. So it's been an opportunity for us to ensure that everybody's getting what they need, and there's always a give and take from both organizations, or all the different organizations that we share with.
I would have to agree, Carolyn.
Go ahead, Brandon.
This is Brandon. Yeah, I would say I'd have to agree. Everyone's been more than willing to share things from SQL scripts to run, billing at 2 o'clock in the morning and pull every activity that's not a billable activity. We ask the question, we throw it out there, does anyone have a script to do this? Or has anybody had this problem and how have you dealt with it? Or does anybody have a form to collect this piece of data? And if anyone's had it, it's always been very much an open sharing community in which we've built a relationship.
This is Sharon again. I think that is what you all have experienced in this peer-to-peer world. I'm just wondering how you have thought about it in the context of an entire industry. Would the CEOs of your organization agree that if two entities in the same state were sitting in a room together, that they should be talking about best practices in clinical services, for example?
I think from our agency standpoint, it's always been a share the knowledge, and share the wealth. Nobody wants to, recreate the wheel. So, I mean, from other agencies within the state of Pennsylvania, we've shared assessments. And, back then you're talking about paper tools for clinical work. But now we're talking about something very specific, which is our EHR. So it that proprietary kind of changes for me, because I don't have anyone in the state of Pennsylvania close to me using the same product. So when you talk about proprietary, for anything we've built or had built for us, that's not something we're able to share within Pennsylvania, but it's certainly something I have the ability to share with Chris or Caroline or Steve, because we have that relationship and we're using the same product.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was someone else saying something?
No, but along those lines, like Brandon said, I mean, even if you were, it's interesting that, so we've got Monarch and Alexander Youth Network that are within the same state, and we share back and forth a lot of different things, whether it be, tools that we're using inside the application, stuff that we're doing that's not application-based but more clinical-based, process flow and all that type of stuff. All those are things that at any point, if you have relationships with different organizations, you can pick up the phone and contact folks and let them know, hey, I'm having an issue with this. I see that you're successful in that area. Is there an opportunity that we could talk about how you're experiencing your successes? And, I don't think we've experienced any resistance from doing any of that, which has been really kind of, maybe they might be holding back pieces of information, and that's fine, but the broader component is giving us, things to think about and stuff that we can work on, which is very valuable in and of itself.
So where do you all think the next big focus will be on things in behavioral health? It seems to me that one of the areas that we need to be thinking about differently is how to determine when new program development is needed. I think we want to be looking at how to promulgate clinical best practices, throughout the industry. Do you guys have any sense of where your organizations are looking and where you think the future of some of this crowd-based learning is going to go?
Sharon, I think that the idea of crowdsourcing and trying to figure out, the next innovation or the next, area that we've got to move into is valuable. But another piece of it is realizing that even old things can be done in new ways or applied in new ways. And I know we were talking earlier about the whole issue revolving around eligibility of our clients, and the reality that whatever services we're doing or whatever services we're thinking of doing, we've got to figure out if there's a payer source, and if we're going to get paid for that service because we've got the appropriate documentation, or because that client is eligible for that service. I mean, I came into the business in the clinical world and not the billing world, but just in the past 6 months to a year, to find out that billing departments are wrestling with this whole issue of eligibility of clients, and that we've been paying in the states that I've been involved with, we've been paying thousands of dollars to clearinghouses to determine eligibility. And come to find out that this whole concept of a 270 and 271 has been around for years. In fact, it was even in our software. And I just never, we never used it because either didn't know how or hadn't been informed. And it was really at a peer-to-peer that I heard about it in a billing thing one year, and we started talking about it. And the next year we went back and talked with folks about how we can make this work at our agency, and got it working for what it needed to, for what we needed to do in our state. And yet another state couldn't use it in its original form in the software, and we had to tweak it just a little bit to get it to work. But here's a concept that's been around for years, that most states provide that eligibility information for no cost, and we've got it available in our software now, and we can determine it before any service is provided, or for every client that we have in the system, determine their eligibility before we provide services. So that was all come about as kind of an idea at a crowdsourcing event, but it was an application of something that was old and had been around for a while, but now has suddenly risen to the top because the eligibility became such an issue.
And if you weren't using a third-party source to verify your eligibility, you were using your own staff time to verify that, like we were.
Yes.
And so we have a staff calling on every single kid at the beginning of every single month to verify their eligibility for Medicaid. And so that's one of the things that's been really cool, is that we've been able to start this whole new process of verifying electronically. And so now we've been able to open up that staff who was overwhelmed with all the stuff that they had to do, and wasn't, you know, at the beginning every month was always falling behind. So we're able to open up her schedule a little bit, give her more availability to do other things, which is really, really kind of cool. And, you know, it's just been really, it's something that's really cool. And then Steve was telling us he's doing it, so now we're going to go back and forth. I got to go back and forth with Steve to figure out what processes and procedures he put in place and how they're breaking it down and who's owning it and all that fun stuff, to get some ideas of how he's done it in those other two organizations, which is going to be very valuable in making sure that we can stay on top of that and improve it even more.
So just kind of following up on that idea of the next kind of steps for crowdsourcing, and I think it's interesting to point out that some things already exist, but we haven't necessarily as an industry thought about the way to make the best use of those things. What have you all seen in your clinical environment in terms of people using the software, in terms of people thinking about innovative ways to create clinical protocols, in terms of thinking about clinical standard development? What innovative ways has your internal organization used your, for lack of a better word, internal crowd?
Well, the whole idea of integrated care and where the industry seems to be going, and being able to, over the last 4 or 5 years, actually develop the electronic record that really is a behavioral health record, but be able to develop it in such a way that it can also handle integrated care and can capture meaningful medical information, and that medical information can now be, you know, tied together with you know, with the mental health information, all within one record, depending upon your level of integration that you really want to have. So that was a lot of back and forth and a lot of adaptation, you know, especially with the ICD, you know, 10 coming in. How do we get now, you know, our vendor, you know, our EHR vendor had a lot of mental health diagnoses that were a part of it, but then also to get behavioral health in there, and which diagnoses to get in there of the 60,000 plus that were out there. So the ongoing challenges with being able to adapt to the environment that's pushing us to adapt.
And Sharon, from
And I can tell you,
go ahead.
I can tell you from Monarch standpoint, in working with our Chief Clinical Officer, we're currently working in our electronic health record to definitely create those clinical decision support modules that the clinicians are going to be able to use to give them the support that they need during their assessments or during their sessions, so that, again, it's using the information that's in our electronic health record to help them to be able to work better and work more efficient with the individuals, to be able to give them what they need in a real-time perspective, and it's right at the touch of their fingertips. So I think the cool thing about that is, again, our electronic health record is definitely flexible enough, but it takes the clinical side to be able to develop those clinical decision support modules and everything that entails for that to be developed. And so, you know, I think that's the next step, is, again, giving our clinicians the ability to have that access at their fingertips while the individual is sitting right there in front of them.
And from Alexander's, one of the things we do at Alexander's is we have a kind of like a multidisciplinary team approach to our development of our application. So we got a couple things available to all of our staff. We got, our team has representatives of different parts of the organization, from direct care staff to more management type staff to clinical directors. So everybody's kind of given their feedback. We're taking a look at all the compliance issues, all the state requirements, everything like that while we're building it out. We also have a tool, kind of like an organization Facebook, for lack of a better label for it. But it's an opportunity for all of our staff to give us feedback on how things are working, what they want to see, what are things that are taking them time, and they'll just shoot us out questions and say, this has taken us so long to do this, about 4 or 5 hours. If you could figure out how to improve this and break it down for us, it would allow us more opportunity to do different things. And so we've kind of been reaching out to our staff that way and asking them to stay involved with the development of the, our tool and our VHR, or our electronic health record. And so that's been a really neat thing for us, and it's actually helped us to make sure that we're doing things and making an application work for our staff versus our staff having to work for the application. And that's been a really cool change over the years.
And Sharon, one other.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I mean, one other example of how we've been able to have our software be able to work in our benefit is if somebody comes in and they score a certain number on the PHQ-9, our system will automatically go in and create a task for the next time that the individual walks in, or 3 months from now, or whatever. It has that logic already built into the system that it'll flag the front desk or the clinician that when the individual comes in that another PHQ-9 needs to be completed. So it automatically, gives them that feedback so that we're not missing, anywhere along their care. But again, it's a tool to create the efficiency with the clinicians to be able to work with the individual to create the outcomes that we need.
Yeah, so that's helpful, and I'm really interested in this idea of using your own internal crowd to improve services. So could you guys talk a little bit about what kind of technology you said? You were talking earlier about a kind of an internal Facebook. What kind of technologies are you guys using to share information, to promote the conversations within your organizations as well as without?
Well, for us, what we've done is we've just recently integrated to Office 365 because for nonprofits it's free. And so part of the Office 365 suite is a tool called Yammer. And Yammer is something that you can set up around your domain. And so you set it up, which is your email domain or whatnot, and then you can set up groups. And so we have a group set up for our, we call it our EHR group, and so anybody can join the group and lob in questions, and it's much like Facebook. So if you put in a question in there, anybody from the team can feed into it, and you can have conversations, and other folks can say, yeah, I think, we're experiencing that, and then there's an opportunity for members of the team who are working on the application to kind of get in there and say, well, what do you think about this, and what do you think about that, and get people from, because our organization, and we have 27 different locations, and so not everybody's in the same region when they're talking. So it's a great opportunity for everybody to be included in a conversation and see what are potential improvement ideas, or for them to throw different things out. And so it's been really neat. It's brought about. It's kind of, it kind of has brought more to light than what we initially anticipated. We thought nobody would use it, but it's been really cool because now people are jumping out there and saying, all right, well, I see that you responded to that, so let's have a discussion about something else.
Yeah,
So
go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
No, I just emailed my chief information officer to ask him about Yammer. By the way, thanks Carolyn for that. Because we also use
really
Microsoft 365.
Yeah, I wrote that down, so thank you very much, Caroline.
But yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
One of the things that we've used here at Adelphoi has been Skype for Business, because we are all across the state of Pennsylvania, from the eastern PA to western PA and everything in between. We do a lot of screen sharing through Skype for Business. We have focus groups who from across the state within our agency that are helping to develop the different assessments that we are building. There are treatment plans that we are in development of. And so Skype for Business allows us to be really almost in the same room at the same time, looking at the same thing, and nobody's had to leave their office to participate in a 2-hour work group. So
have you ever thought about using, Brandon, have you ever thought, or have you guys used, since we're using Skype for Business quite a bit in the way that you explained it, but we're getting ready to look into using Skype for Business as a kind of like a HIPAA compliant texting type tool for our doctors to do orders for medications, because, you know, the Joint Commission just came out with new requirements for texting for medical orders and everything like that, and we'd like to leverage some of our tools, and we think that Skype for Business on all of the different smartphones that our docs and nurses have might be a good way to handle it, especially since we can manage and retain the messages. I was just wondering if you guys have done any of that.
We haven't yet, but I'm going to write it down as a possibility for the future.
Yeah, I think we're going to try and use that instead of trying to bring in another tool, leverage something that we've already got in place, because it already has all the components that we need.
Sure, absolutely.
And so, we're coming to the close. I'd like to ask you guys to each, spend a few minutes giving your summaries, and I'd also like to ask you each to answer the question, I'm interested in starting crowdsourcing involvement. Where's the best place for me to get started? So, Steve, do you want to start since you were the first one to speak?
I think, summarizing the concept of crowdsourcing for me, when I think back over 25 years and realizing that, some form of crowdsourcing or team involvement, how are you going to get enough ideas from the people that are involved in the process to make it a good process? We have to go into it with the realization that it's a slower process than an autocratic, this is the way we're going to do things, so just get it done type thing. So you have to accept that crowdsourcing is going to generate a lot of ideas, and that's part of that's the best part of it. But then being able as a group to take those ideas and get the pieces that we can apply, and not so much keep the crowdsourcing going to keep getting more ideas and then getting held up in the process of looking at all the wonderful ideas. The reality is somewhere along the line we got to decide this is the way we're going to apply it. But then, after you make the application as best as you could with those initial ideas, then to realize that we can still do crowdsourcing after the implementation for people to make better what we already have, or take something that's in place and apply it in a different way. So just the reality to draw the line somewhere, because it's really exciting, the concept of crowdsourcing and getting all these ideas from so many different sources, but we got to be able to sit down and apply those ideas in a way that's efficient and timely, and then be able to then let people bounce off of what we've actually thrown out there. So so just be aware of those shortcomings, I think, of crowdsourcing and the application of it, to just keep it as an ongoing process. But eventually, I mean, nothing's as good as it's ever going to be. You can always improve it. So.
Okay, thank you. Brandon, you want to go next?
Sure. One thing that we've recently brought to the table at Adelphoi as far as our crowdsourcing is upping the level of our internal crowdsourcing. Our clinicians, our key team members that are working with our clients in their units, in their homes, those are the people that we want to hear from most, because we want to make sure that we're developing a product that is going to not only work for them but make their lives easier. And we can sit around as a project team and brainstorm and come up with ideas, and we can crowdsource externally, but it's our clinical staff who are doing that daily documentation who can really say, hey, my life would be a lot easier if this became checkboxes and this became drop downs, and this text field here, I don't really need that because 7 checkboxes that will allow me to document better and faster and increase my face-to-face time. Those are the things we need to hear as an agency and internally to keep us, where we're at, where we're hoping to move to as an agency. Expansion, all those things are a result of the work of our direct clinical staff, and so I think that's one of our greatest resources to crowdsource.
Thank you. Chris, I'm going counterclockwise around the picture, so Chris.
Sorry, I had on mute. Yeah, I think for us, for crowdsourcing, it starts sort of like what Brandon was saying. I think internally, getting the input from your clinicians, getting input from frontline staff who have ideas on whether it's new service lines or whether it's how your electronic health record should be set up, or getting those ideas and then implementing ones that make sense, and then also giving feedback on why the ones that don't make sense, and what you're doing to work through that. So I think it is definitely important to have that internal crowdsourcing available. But I also think going to conferences, going to collaboratives and meetings out in the community. I think every opportunity that you can go to, whether any type of meeting, can be an opportunity for crowdsourcing, where you can get ideas, where you can find nuggets of information that can help you to be better from a clinical standpoint or an operational standpoint, financial, and always keeping those opportunities available. So if again, I think if I was going to recommend, I would recommend starting internally, but then also having individuals when they go to out of state, which is great because you can pull from other states for individuals on how they're doing things in other locations, which you can bring back to your own organization, and crowdsourcing that way. So that's it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And last but not least, Carolyn, do you want to do your summary?
Yeah, I think crowdsourcing, it's interesting, all the perspectives that Steve, Brandon, and Chris have brought up are a lot of the different things that we've already, that we are adopting and putting in place, and it's been very helpful in making sure that not only does our application work for us, but do our service lines work for us? Do we, are we doing what's best for our business as well as for the clients that we serve? And so every opportunity that we get to gather information, and pretty much everybody in our organization that goes to any of the conferences, any of the collaboratives, any of the different meetings that they go to, they seem to want to come back with the information and feel really energized with information that they've learned or things that they've
gathered from different people and stuff. So it's been, it kind of allows us, especially most organizations, nonprofit organizations, work with really tight budgets when it comes to the support and part of the organization. And so opportunities to kind of go out there and gather information from whether it be other organizations or other people, allows for, a greater perspective of how you can implement or do different things. And that's been really valuable. We gather information from our internal staff, external folks. We even gather it from parents, which is really kind of neat, and opportunities for them to tell us ways that we can improve. Just like everything else, when you're gathering information, some of it's good and some of it's stuff that you can't put in place. And so I think one of the things that we do whenever we're gathering the information is always make it clear to the people that we've asked to give us feedback or to present their ideas that we're always transparent in the response and saying, sometimes some of this stuff we can put some of this in place and some of it we can't put in place, but we want to let you know that you've been heard and that we value what you said. And so I think that that's the biggest thing that I take out of this. And I love meeting with different people and talking about their applications. I love showing off my application because I'm really proud of the things that we've done. I like seeing what other people do and feeling it, and that's the best thing right there. So it's a great opportunity to keep everybody energized all around. So that's wonderful. I think we have answered all the questions. Any last-minute questions that are out there? If people want to type in your question box, we can finish it up. If not, then I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. I think this was really interesting. We are going to continue this discussion about crowdsourcing at our strategic, oh no, I'm going to forget the name. Brittany, help.
Our Strategy and Innovations Institute.
Thank you so much. In June in New Orleans, and we hope to see folks there. I am not seeing any additional questions, so I think we can close out this session. And thank you very much to the speakers. It was really interesting and innovative conversation. And thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to our audience. Bye, everyone.
Great,
thank you.